I broke up with my boyfriend for the dumbest reason, his inspiration, and he blamed me for not doing the dishes. So, let me tell you how I wasted 6 years of my life carrying a dreamer on my back like a dead weight, and what finally pushed me to cut the cord. My name's Amelia. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a paramedic. I've been working since I was 19, juggling EMT school and 2 part-time jobs. You don't do this job for the money or the hours. You do it because you want to help people. And I do. I genuinely love my work, even if it leaves me emotionally and physically wrecked half the time. Now, about Travis. He's 33, and I met him when I was 24. We were at a friend's housewarming party. He had this laid-back charisma, told everyone he was working on something revolutionary, and dropped words like disruption, pivot, and scaling like confetti. I was too tired and too single to see the red flags at the time. He called himself a founder, a visionary, a startup guy. I thought, okay, maybe I just met someone with drive. Except the drive went absolutely nowhere. For 6 years, I paid for everything. And I mean everything. Rent. My name was the only one on the lease. Groceries. All me. Internet. Gas. Electric. Water. Trash. Yep. Car insurance. I covered his too because he said, I'll pay you back once the seed round hits. Spoiler, there was no seed round. Just a lot of talk about apps that never got built and pitches that never went anywhere. At first, I believed in him. I really did. The first year, I thought he just needed time. He told me he was working on a health tech platform, something that could help first responders like me. That hit a soft spot, I won't lie. He'd stay up all night clicking away at his laptop and watching YouTube videos about programming. I brought him coffee, rubbed his shoulders. I was proud, in some twisted way, that he was chasing something big. But then, time kept passing. Years started melting into each other, and I started noticing things. The nights he'd grind were mostly him browsing Reddit, scrolling through crypto forums, and arguing with people about market psychology. He joined Discord servers full of other startup bros who were all between rounds. I remember coming home one night after a 14-hour shift, covered in sweat and blood, and found him playing Rocket League in his underwear. He didn't even ask how my day was. Just yelled, "Babe, the server's lagging. Can you restart the router?" It became normal. I enabled it. And I'm not proud of that. Every time I tried to talk about finances, he had some reason he couldn't contribute yet. He'd say, I'm just a few weeks away from a breakthrough, or I'm in talks with a guy who knows a guy who can get us a meeting. Meanwhile, I was killing myself doing 24s and doubles to cover his share of everything. He'd offer to cook sometimes, and by cook, I mean throw frozen burritos in the microwave and call it low-effort meal prepping. The worst part? I defended him. To my friends. To my parents. I'd say he's trying. He just hasn't caught his break. My best friend Olivia begged me to open my eyes. She's a nurse and knew exactly how drained I was. She once found me asleep in my car outside the ER because I didn't even have the energy to go inside after work. I kept making excuses for him, like an idiot. Then came the final straw. Last fall, I got injured on a call. Slipped on a wet tile floor while carrying a patient, tore a ligament in my knee. I was out of work for 8 weeks. Workers' comp helped a bit, but I was still stretched thin. I asked Travis if he could maybe start picking up some temp work or freelancing. Literally anything. DoorDash, customer support, something. He looked me dead in the eye and said, but that would distract me from my vision. I wanted to throw something. While I was stuck at home, barely able to walk, he was watching videos on how to invest in NFTs and ordering $15 smoothies with my card. I'd come into the kitchen and see DoorDash bags with sushi and artisan coffee. One day I found out he bought a mechanical keyboard kit online for $180. I was like, what are you doing with a custom keyboard if you don't have a job? He said, it's an investment in my productivity. I snapped. I finally told him to get out. I gave him 30 days and told him I was done supporting him. His response, you're quitting on me right when I'm about to launch. I asked what he was launching. He couldn't give me a straight answer. Something about a wellness app that helps people visualize their goals using AI-generated images. I asked if he had a prototype. He said he was still working on the pitch deck. I told him I didn't care anymore. He left a week before his deadline, sulking like a teenager. Took his keyboard and his vision board and disappeared. I haven't seen him since. He tried texting me a few weeks later, saying he was crashing at his friend's place, and could I maybe help him with rent for 1 more month until he got back on his feet. I blocked him. I'm still paying off the credit card debt I racked up trying to keep us afloat. I still limp sometimes when it's cold, and I get angry every time I open my fridge and remember the nights I went without dinner so he could have brain fuel. He had this way of pitching things like he was on Shark Tank, and I was the investor he just had to win over. The worst part? For a long time, it worked. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted so badly for something, anything, to click, that I ignored all logic and let him pull me into one doomed venture after another. The first of his brilliant ideas was the coffee shop on wheels. It started with a secondhand food truck we bought using part of my savings and a small loan in my name, because of course his credit was wrecked from the last venture before I even met him. He painted it himself, badly, in what he called minimalist industrial style, but honestly just looked like a primer coat. He called it Bingo, a mobile urban caffeine solution, whatever that meant. The business plan, if you could even call it that, was basically him parking near gyms and handing out iced lattes to people who didn't ask for them. He never got a permit, never checked the zoning laws. Within 2 weeks, he got fined twice. The truck broke down near a dog park, and he abandoned the whole idea like it was some failed science project. Then he got into streaming. Full setup, lights, mic, dual monitors, the whole thing, all paid for with my credit card. He swore up and down that if he could just grind for a few months, get consistent, he'd hit Twitch affiliate, and we'd have passive income rolling in. He streamed maybe 4 times. Each one lasted an hour and consisted mostly of him getting frustrated at the game, yelling at lag, and then rage quitting. When I'd ask how it was going, he'd say, "The algorithm's not playing fair, but I'm close to breaking through." Close to what? I never found out. After the streaming phase, he fell in love with crypto. I came home one night and found him watching some guy on YouTube in sunglasses talking about decentralized finance. That was the start of the Ethereum phase. He took what little money he had from a birthday gift his mom gave him and bought some obscure coin that crashed within a month. Then, because clearly he hadn't learned a damn thing, he decided to make his own cryptocurrency. Not mine it, make it. He called it Travcoin. He stayed up all night watching Solidity tutorials and tried to launch it on some janky platform. I asked him who was supposed to use Travcoin. He said, "Everyone, eventually. We'll build hype through exclusivity." No one ever bought it. He even offered me 10,000 of them as a Valentine's Day gift. I told him I'd rather have gas money. His most recent stroke of genius was writing a book, a memoir, at 33, about his journey as a misunderstood visionary. He never actually wrote it, not really. Just a bunch of half-finished Google Docs with titles like Breaking the Matrix, My Path to Nonlinear Success, and You Are the Startup. One chapter was literally just a list of motivational quotes copied from Pinterest. He asked me to edit it once, and I couldn't make it past the intro without cringing. He called me unsupportive and said that creative people don't get appreciated until they're dead. I told him I didn't want to wait that long. Each time he'd fail, he'd mope for a few days, then emerge with some new half-baked scheme. Every single one came with a pep talk. This one's different. You'll see, this is the one that sticks. No more distractions. I'm all in. And every time, I'd nod and tell myself that maybe this time, it would be different. Because the idea of walking away after investing so much time and money and love felt like admitting defeat. But it wasn't just the failures, it was how he failed. He never listened to advice. Never planned beyond the excitement phase. Never took accountability when things collapsed. It was always someone else's fault. The economy, the haters, the tech limitations, the lack of exposure, the bad timing. And always, without fail, I was the one left picking up the pieces, rescheduling my shifts to accommodate his big launch day, covering overdraft fees because he forgot his subscriptions were still running, lying to my friends about why we couldn't afford to go out, because I was too embarrassed to admit I was bankrolling yet another dead-end dream. I wasn't a partner to him. I was a backup generator. And eventually, I stopped waiting for the lights to turn on. About 2 weeks before everything ended, I noticed Travis had gone unusually quiet. Not the usual sulky silence that came after one of his projects tanked. This was different. He wasn't pacing around the apartment ranting about missed opportunities or system failures. He wasn't sketching out flowcharts or talking my ear off about some new buzzword he picked up. No, this time, he was just gone. Not physically, but mentally. Buried in his phone, headphones on, nodding to himself like he was listening to the secrets of the universe being whispered through TikTok. At first I figured he was just warming up for another doomed idea. I'd gotten used to that pattern, radio silence. Then a burst of creativity that involved signing up for a new domain or ordering some ridiculous piece of equipment we didn't need. So I didn't think much of it at first. But then he started throwing around these phrases like alignment and energetic boundaries, talking about clearing space for his next evolution. I thought it was another scammy podcast feeding him nonsense, or some grifter online selling success through detachment. One night, we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch. I was trying to wind down after a long shift, eating leftovers out of the container with a plastic fork because I didn't even have the energy to wash dishes. He looked up from his phone and said, completely out of nowhere, "Did you know that attachment is the root of suffering?" I read that today. It really stuck with me. I looked at him and just blinked. This man hadn't done a single load of laundry in 2 months, and now he was quoting spiritual philosophy between TikTok scrolls like some kind of urban monk. The next day, he started sleeping later than usual, which was already saying something, considering the man had no job and no concept of time. When I'd come home in the evening, he'd be on the balcony staring off into the distance, or filming himself with his phone on a tripod. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, just documenting the process. When I asked what process, he gave me this beatific smile and said, growth can't always be explained. It has to be felt. He even stopped talking about money entirely. That used to be his favorite topic, at least in the hypothetical. He loved throwing out phrases like early capital, seed investment, and scalable model, usually while I was figuring out how to stretch a paycheck until next Tuesday. But suddenly, he was above all that. He started saying things like, abundance isn't about currency, it's about consciousness. Meanwhile, I was still working back-to-back shifts and calculating if I could skip groceries for one more day. Then he started asking for space. He told me I was distracting him with my stress and that he needed clarity without emotional noise. That was his new thing, emotional noise. Apparently, I was the static disrupting his inner frequency. I remember laughing bitterly when he said it, thinking how convenient it was that his personal growth phase required me to be quiet and invisible while he recalibrated. But the real kicker was the morning he told me he was going on a digital detox. Not from TikTok, of course, but from me. From our routines. From the relationship. He said he wanted to explore solitude. I asked if that meant we were breaking up, and he said, labels limit transformation. I stood there in my scrubs, barely 5 hours of sleep in me, holding my keys and my coffee thermos, and just stared at him. It was so absurd, I didn't even have the energy to argue. He walked back to the bedroom, closed the door, and posted a story an hour later about letting go of what no longer serves you. I saw it while sitting in the ambulance bay, eating a bag of chips for dinner. That was when it clicked. He wasn't working on a project. He wasn't planning anything at all. He was preparing to leave, but he wanted to make it look like some kind of spiritual awakening instead of what it actually was, just another escape. Except this time, it wasn't from a failed startup or an unpaid bill. This time, he was escaping from me. And the craziest part? He expected me to admire him for it. It was a Thursday night, and I'd just gotten home from a 16-hour shift. We'd responded to 2 overdoses, a highway pileup, and a cardiac arrest in a grocery store parking lot. My boots still had dried blood on them. My shoulders ached from lifting stretchers, and my hair smelled like antiseptic. I barely had the energy to unlock the front door, let alone process what Travis was doing when I walked in. He was sitting at the kitchen table, completely calm, like he'd just finished journaling or meditating or whatever pseudo-spiritual nonsense he'd been soaking up that week. He had lit a candle, lavender and sage, his new ritual. The room was dim, his laptop closed, no sign of a game or a business pitch. Just him, sitting there, waiting. It was eerie. I dropped my bag by the door, muttered something about how dead I was, and reached into the fridge for a bottle of water. That's when he said it. Calmly, clearly, like it was just another line in his day's script. We have to break up. You do nothing in the house. I actually laughed. I stood there, blinking at him, water bottle halfway to my lips, and laughed. I thought he was messing with me. I thought maybe this was some weird attempt at a joke or another one of his TikTok-influenced communication experiments. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at me and repeated it. Seriously, Amelia, you don't contribute here. I do everything. I think I stopped breathing for a second. I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my voice even. I'm sorry, what do you mean I don't contribute? He exhaled through his nose like he was explaining something to a child. The dishes, the laundry, folding clothes. You never do those things. I carry the mental load of the apartment. It took everything in me not to throw the bottle across the room. I was the one who paid the rent. I paid the internet, the electric, the gas, the groceries. I literally carried this man for 6 years, financially, emotionally, practically. He hadn't held a steady job for even a month, hadn't paid a single bill. And now, because I hadn't folded the towels the way he liked, I was the one dragging him down. I asked him, calmly at first, what he thought I did every day. He shrugged. You work, but that doesn't mean you get to ignore the household. I reminded him that I worked 12, sometimes 16-hour shifts, while he spent entire days watching videos about cryptocurrency scams and making lists of people to network with. He actually had the nerve to say, I'm building a future, Amelia. Just because I don't clock in and out doesn't mean I'm not working. I stood there in silence for a moment, just absorbing the absurdity. I looked around the apartment. My name was on the lease. My credit was on the line. Everything inside, from the couch to the TV to the blender, was something I had bought. Every bill we had went through my bank account. I even bought his phone. And this man, sitting on a chair I paid for, under a roof I kept over our heads, had the audacity to tell me I didn't contribute because I didn't do the dishes after a double shift. He said, "I just don't feel appreciated. I feel like I'm doing this alone." I wanted to scream. Alone? Alone where? In what universe had he done anything by himself? He lived like a guest in a hotel that never charged him, and now he was firing the concierge for not folding his socks. I don't even remember what I said after that. I think I just nodded, went to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed in complete disbelief. He followed me in later, saying it was better this way, and that he needed room to evolve. He talked about how people outgrow each other, and that I shouldn't be upset. It was just the natural progression of relationships. Like he hadn't just blindsided me with a breakup over laundry. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just let him talk, let him spin whatever script he'd written in his head that made him feel like the enlightened one. But inside, I was done. Not because he wanted to leave, but because I finally saw how delusional he really was. He needed me to be the villain in his little personal growth story, and I wasn't going to play that part anymore. People always say you don't notice how ridiculous something is until you step back from it. But in my case, I was drowning in it every day and still somehow couldn't see how far gone things had gotten. I'd be out the door before sunrise, uniform on, coffee in hand, knowing I was about to spend the next 12 hours dealing with gunshot wounds, heart attacks, overdoses, car accidents, and the general chaos that comes with being a paramedic working shifts in a city hospital. Meanwhile, Travis would still be asleep, wrapped in a blanket burrito, blackout curtains drawn, phone clutched in one hand like it was a lifeline. When I got home, hours later, drained and sore, and sometimes still wearing clothes with blood on them, he'd be sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with headphones in, eyes closed, calling it meditation. Incense burning, one of my throw blankets draped around his shoulders like he was some wandering sage. He'd open his eyes slowly and tell me he'd had a major breakthrough about market trends and energetic alignment. I couldn't tell if he was high or just completely deluded. Maybe both. He liked to say he was studying the market. That was his go-to phrase when I'd ask what he'd done all day. Just studying the market, trying to understand volatility cycles. Once I pressed him to explain what market he was actually studying, he said, "All of them. Life is a market. Time is a market." I had to walk away before I said something I'd regret. He had this fantasy that his self-discipline and spiritual hustle were equivalent to the physical and emotional labor I put in every day. While I carried people down flights of stairs during cardiac arrests and rode in ambulances praying a patient would make it through traffic, he was watching long-form YouTube videos of other people making money and convincing himself that absorbing that energy was preparation. He told me once that I was addicted to the grind because I didn't know how to live with stillness. This, while I was literally the only reason we had electricity. His contribution to the apartment? At best, cosmetic. One day I came home to find all the books on our shelves rearranged, not by author, not by genre, but by color. "It's more harmonious this way," he said, smiling like he'd just solved world hunger. He was so proud of it, like he had done something monumental, some great favor to our living space. I asked where my notebook went, the one with my CE training notes for my recertification, and he just said, "Oh, I moved it." It didn't match the aesthetic. He also decided to throw out my toaster. Not because it didn't work, not because it was broken or unsafe or outdated, but because it didn't bring joy. He said this while holding it like it was a cursed object. "You deserve better energy in your mornings," he told me, without offering to replace it. I was left reheating waffles in a frying pan for 3 weeks until I finally bought a new one on my next day off. Every time I tried to talk about how unequal things were, he'd twist it into some kind of lecture on emotional value. "You keep thinking in terms of what's visible, what's tangible," he'd say, "but what I'm doing has long-term resonance." Meanwhile, I was doing laundry at midnight and falling asleep sitting up with my boots still on. I think what really broke me wasn't just that he didn't help. It was that he genuinely believed we were equals, that his daily stillness practice and my 911 calls were somehow both forms of service. He once said, "You heal the body. I heal the vibration." I had to leave the room before I screamed. In his world, he was a visionary preparing for greatness. In mine, he was a grown man mooching off a woman who had to set 3 alarms just to make it to work on time because she couldn't afford to miss a single shift. It was fiction versus reality, and he was too far gone to know the difference. The breakup itself wasn't even the worst part. What came after? That's what really pushed me to the edge. You'd think after sitting me down and breaking up with me over not folding towels or whatever delusional reason he'd cooked up, Travis would have the decency to pack his things and find somewhere else to crash. But no, in true Travis fashion, he somehow interpreted the end of our relationship as a reset button for his own personal utopia. It started the next morning. I had barely slept, lying in bed numb with exhaustion and disbelief. When I finally got up and walked into the kitchen, he was already there, barefoot, humming to himself like he didn't just drop a bomb on our lives the night before. He had brewed coffee and was reading on his phone, some productivity blog or meditation guide, no doubt. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "I think this is going to be good for both of us." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "This," he said, waving his hand around like he was referring to a renovation. "The reboot. A fresh start. I've been thinking, it's time we redefine our space. I've got some big ideas." He said it with this lightness in his voice like he'd just moved a couch, not detonated a 6-year relationship. I didn't even respond at first. I went to pour myself coffee, trying to act like I hadn't just heard something completely insane. Then he dropped the next gem. "I think you should take a little time to recenter," he said, watching me over the rim of his mug. "Maybe go stay with your parents for a while. You've been carrying a lot of tension lately. That house in the suburbs, it's got nature, right? Trees. Peace. I think it'll help your energy." I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. "This is my apartment," I reminded him, slowly, carefully. "It's in my name. I pay the rent. I pay every single bill. You don't get to kick me out." He gave me this look like I'd just misunderstood the terms of our breakup. "No, no, no, I'm not kicking you out. I'm just saying maybe it's the right time for you to, reset too. Let the space evolve. It doesn't have to be hostile." I don't even know how I didn't scream in that moment. He went on like nothing was wrong. Told me he was thinking of getting a dog. Said a rescue would be good company, and he'd finally have the time to train it now that he wasn't emotionally burdened. Then he gestured toward the guest room and said, "I've been thinking, maybe I turn that space into an office. I could finally build the podcast studio I've been dreaming about." The guest room, the same one I'd used to store my uniforms, gear, old textbooks, even medical supplies I sometimes brought home because the rig didn't have room. I asked what I was supposed to do with all of that, and he said, "We'll figure it out. Maybe donate it. You're pivoting now." He truly thought that me getting dumped meant I was now free to clear out my own life to make room for his. It was like breaking up was a startup launch, and he was pitching himself to me as the new CEO of our shared living space. For the next 2 days, he strutted around the apartment like he'd won something. Moved my shoes from the front closet so he could open up the energy by the door. Cleared out the fridge of anything he didn't like, including the meal preps I'd made for work, because they were too rigid. Started rearranging the living room furniture so they feng shui better supported his new solo journey. And all the while, he acted like he was being generous, like letting me stay in the apartment that I alone had been paying for with some great favor. It was delusion, pure and undiluted, wrapped in spiritual language and TikTok therapy speak. I watched him walk around, barefoot and blissful, talking to himself about new beginnings, while I quietly packed his things into boxes. That's how it ended. Not with a tearful goodbye, not with a final fight. Just me, exhausted from work and heartbreak, folding up his hoodie and stuffing it into a tote bag while he stood nearby picking out dog names. He didn't even realize I was the one doing the reboot, starting with kicking him the hell out. The most absurd part of it all, the cherry on top of the delusion sundae, was that Travis genuinely thought he had some kind of stake in the place. He walked around like a man reclaiming his kingdom, issuing declarations about where the couch should go and what kind of dog food brand he preferred, completely oblivious to one critical fact: the house was mine. Not metaphorically, not in some we share our lives kind of way. Legally, on paper, in every possible sense, it was mine. It had been my grandfather's. A small 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street, nothing flashy, but solid. He left it to me in his will when I was 24, shortly after I'd finished my EMT training. At the time, I wasn't making much, and owning a home felt like some impossible dream. Until the letter came, handwritten, telling me he wanted me to have something stable. I remember crying in the driveway the first time I pulled up with my own keys in hand. Everything tied to that house is in my name. The utilities, the insurance. The mortgage had already been paid off by the time I inherited it, but I've spent thousands since then on repairs, upgrades, appliances. I replaced the roof. I upgraded the furnace. I paid for the plumbing to be redone when the pipes burst that one miserable February. Every square inch of that house had my effort in it. My sweat, my money, my decisions. But Travis? He either forgot or never bothered to understand that. In his head, the house was just part of the lifestyle he had somehow manifested into existence. He referred to it as our space when he was pitching me ideas about knocking down a wall to create an open creative flow zone. Once, he actually said, "I love how we built this together." I almost choked on my coffee. He didn't pay rent. He didn't contribute to bills. He didn't help with any repairs or maintenance. When the hot water heater died last winter, I was the one shivering through 2 nights of cold showers while waiting for a technician, and he was the one asking if he could boil water for a bath instead, like we were living in the 1800s. I handled every repair call, every payment, every ounce of responsibility. He treated the whole place like a hotel with room service and spiritual ambience. So when he stood in the kitchen, calmly informing me that I should move out so he could reset the energy of the space, I didn't even argue. I just stared at him. It was like watching someone try to rewrite reality with pure confidence. Later that night, I pulled out the file folder with the deed and left it on the dining table, open to the page with my name printed in bold. He walked by it the next morning, stopped, and stared. I watched the realization flicker across his face like a glitch in the Matrix. He didn't say anything right away, just blinked a few times, then muttered something about material ownership being a social construct. I didn't respond, because I was done explaining things to him, done being the one to carry the weight while he floated in and out of whatever fantasy he was living in. The house wasn't his. It never was. And the only reboot happening was the one where I finally reclaimed my space and kicked out the man who never understood what it meant to build anything real. A week after the breakup, just when I thought I had seen the full extent of Travis's delusion, he decided to level up. I came home on a Sunday afternoon after an exhausting double shift, 2 cardiac arrests, and a teenager who'd overdosed in a gas station bathroom. And all I wanted was to take a hot shower, eat whatever leftovers I could scrape together, and collapse in bed for 12 hours. Instead, I opened the door and walked straight into what felt like an open house tour. Only I wasn't the host. I was the silent, stunned owner watching a stranger parade through my home. Her name was Macy. He introduced her like we were all old friends, his voice high and cheerful, the kind of fake enthusiasm he reserved for networking events and new ideas. "This is Macy," he said as she smiled and waved, completely at ease. "She's got amazing taste. I'm showing her the space." The space. He was referring to my house like it was some empty venue he had booked for the weekend. I said nothing at first, just raised my eyebrows as Macy walked around, completely oblivious, complimenting the vibe of the living room and talking about how she loved the natural light. Travis, clearly proud of himself, began pointing out all the rooms, like he was giving a private tour of a rental property. He walked her into the guest room and called it the future podcast studio. Then he opened the hallway closet and said, "We'll clear this out eventually. I just haven't had time to reorganize yet." I followed silently until we reached what had always been my small office, the room where I kept my study materials, my licenses, and a fold-out desk I used to finish paperwork or review emergency protocols on days when I couldn't focus in the main rooms. Travis opened the door dramatically and said, "This is my workspace. I've been using it for content planning and strategy sessions." It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. The only thing Travis had ever strategized in that room was how to balance his laptop on a stack of unopened mail while watching videos about algorithm hacks. The books on the shelves were mine. The whiteboard with emergency response codes? Mine. The calendar with shift rotations, the CPR manuals, even the damn printer, every bit of it mine. Macy turned to me with a wide, polite smile. "You're so lucky to have this space," she said. "Travis told me you're just staying here for now." I think I actually forgot how to speak for a second. He had told her I was staying here, in the house I inherited, the house I maintained, the house where he had never paid a single cent in rent. I looked at him and saw that casual, serene smile he always put on when he thought he was being profound or clever. He didn't even look embarrassed. He really believed he could just rewrite the truth if he said it with enough conviction. I didn't say much. I just nodded slowly and said, "Right. I'm just here temporarily." Travis looked relieved, like he'd dodged a bullet, and started talking about possibly repainting the kitchen. Macy said she loved sage green. The moment they stepped out onto the back patio, my back patio, I grabbed my phone and called my cousin, who's a lawyer. Because if Travis wanted to pretend he was a tenant in some shared creative hub, he was about to find out what the real world looked like when you crossed the line from delusional to disrespectful. Let him give tours. Let him plan his fake office. He had no idea the lease he was narrating didn't even have his name on it. I didn't yell. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't throw his crap onto the lawn or scream about respect or fairness. I just stood there in the doorway of my own office, listening to Travis spin stories about future furniture placements and acoustic panels while Macy nodded along, completely buying into the fantasy. Then I smiled, calm, composed, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Don't worry, I've already made up my mind." He barely glanced at me. He just kept walking Macy through the kitchen, talking about rearranging the cabinets and maybe installing a smoothie bar in the corner. To him, I probably looked defeated, worn out, maybe even on the edge of moving out like he'd so helpfully suggested the week before. That's the thing with Travis. He always underestimated quiet. He only recognized power if it was loud. If it didn't come with yelling or tears or threats, it wasn't real to him. But I had made up my mind. And unlike him, I had the paperwork, the keys, the history, and now, the will to finish what should have been done months ago. While he was talking about what kind of rug would open up the energy in the hallway, I had already scheduled the lock change. While he was pointing to a wall and saying, "Imagine this in burnt orange," I had emailed the documents to my cousin with the title line, "Ready to proceed." I didn't bother correcting Macy. I didn't say, "Actually, this is my house." I didn't flash the deed or list the mortgage-free status or point out that every piece of furniture he was promising her had come from my credit card, my budget, my back-breaking work. I just watched, smiling, cold, detached, like I was already somewhere else entirely. Because I was. I had moved past the denial, the frustration, the bargaining. I had moved past trying to reason with him or hoping he'd come to his senses. I was done feeling embarrassed or resentful or guilty. Now I was planning, executing, finalizing. By the time they left that afternoon, him walking her out like a proud homeowner showing off the future, he still didn't get it. He thought he'd won, thought I was too emotionally drained to fight back, thought I was quietly slipping away like every other opportunity he'd wasted. He didn't know that when I said I'd made up my mind, it wasn't about leaving. It was about removing him permanently. Not with drama, not with chaos, but with documents, locks, and silence. The kind of cold that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't need to. I woke up before sunrise. I didn't shower, didn't make coffee, didn't bother slipping quietly around the house like I usually did when I had an early shift. I was already dressed, sitting by the window with the locksmith's number queued up on my phone. I waited until the sky turned that pale gray, the moment between night and morning when the world still feels suspended. Then I hit dial. The guy arrived less than an hour later. Middle-aged, polite, no small talk. I let him in, pointed to the front and back doors, and told him I wanted everything replaced. Keys, tumblers, deadbolts. While he worked, I stayed silent. I didn't feel nervous or vindictive, just focused. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing to explain. By the time Travis woke up, the job was nearly done. I heard him come down the stairs slowly, yawning loud like he wanted applause for waking up before noon. He was in sweatpants and one of those obnoxious oversized hoodies he always wore when he was in creative flow mode. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, completely unaware. He didn't even notice the stranger in the foyer at first. Then, without looking up from his phone, he mumbled, "Is that someone from the city? You need to tell me when you schedule stuff, Amelia. I've got an idea I'm mapping out today." I turned from the sink, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and looked at him dead on. My voice didn't shake. I didn't raise it. I just said, "Today you are moving out. This is my house. You have no right to be here." He blinked like he hadn't heard me, like the words didn't compute. "What are you talking about?" he asked, laughing, already annoyed, already reaching for that smug tone he used when he thought I was being dramatic. I held up the new set of keys and dropped them into my coat pocket. "Locks are changed," I said. "You're not on any paperwork. Not the deed. Not utilities. Nothing. You have no claim here. Your things are in the spare room. Pack them." He looked past me at the locksmith, who was now quietly testing the new front door. Then back at me. "You're being petty," he said, that edge in his voice starting to rise. "We agreed this was a transition. You said you were going to think about things." I stared at him, expressionless. I did. His face went through a dozen emotions at once: shock, confusion, then indignation. He started pacing, muttering about tenants' rights, about how this wasn't legal, about calling someone. I let him ramble. I didn't argue. I just pulled out the file folder I had left on the table, the one with the deed and all the utility statements with my name and only my name printed in bold. When he saw it, he went quiet. I watched the exact moment he realized there was nothing he could do. That all of the stories he'd told himself and Macy and whoever else, about our space, about the reboot, about my energy not fitting in, meant nothing when it came down to who actually owned the roof over his head. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I didn't even flinch when he tried to guilt me. I just said, "You need to be out by noon. I'll be back later. If you're not gone, I'll have someone escort you out." Then I grabbed my bag, walked out the door with my new keys, and let it close behind me. No drama. No screaming. Just finality. I didn't bother checking in during the day. I gave him the deadline, and I meant it. I had no intention of hovering over him while he scrambled to pack his half-baked life into boxes. I figured if there was even a sliver of decency left in him, he'd at least have the sense not to make it uglier than it needed to be. But around 3 in the afternoon, I got a text from my neighbor. Just one sentence: "He's showing the house again." I didn't even have to ask what she meant. Apparently, Travis had invited Macy over. One last performance. Maybe he thought he could still spin the situation, convince her that it was some kind of mutual decision, that he was choosing to leave in pursuit of higher vibrations or some enlightened journey. But this time, he didn't have the control he thought he did. When Macy arrived, he was in the middle of packing. The front door was propped open, a beat-up suitcase half-zipped near the hallway closet, his keyboard sticking out of a laundry basket. She stepped inside and saw the boxes, the empty hooks where jackets used to hang, and the distinct tension that fills a space when someone's been kicked out and is trying to save face. I wasn't there, but I know exactly how it played out because I know how Travis operates. He probably smiled, tried to make it light, said something about how he was clearing space to make room for new energy. Maybe he told her he was moving into a new phase of life, that this was intentional, empowering, a reset. But Macy, bless her heart, wasn't buying it this time. I heard from a friend later that she didn't even make it past the kitchen. She stood there, looked around at the mess, then back at him, and asked, "Wait, did you actually live here?" He must have panicked, said something vague, maybe tried to pivot. But she connected the dots. The boxes, the silence, the lack of control in his eyes. She left without saying much, walked out the door, and didn't look back. By the time I got home that evening, the sun was starting to set, and the air had that thick, late-day stillness to it. I pulled into the driveway and saw him, sweaty, red-faced, hunched over, hauling out boxes of clothes and his precious office chair, the same one he used to sit in while watching video after video about productivity without ever producing a damn thing. There was no dramatic confrontation, no begging, no parting shots. He barely looked at me. I walked past him, unlocked the door with my new key, and stepped back into my house. I didn't say goodbye, and neither did he. It had only been a few days since Travis left, and I was finally starting to breathe again. The house was quiet in the best way. No more incense smoke drifting out of nowhere. No more late-night videos blaring from his laptop. No more half-eaten plates of inspired snacks left on the coffee table like some kind of offering to the gods of failed ambition. I'd reclaimed the guest room, reopened my office, lit a candle that actually smelled good, and finally sat down on the couch without feeling like I was sitting beside a human black hole of delusion. And then my phone rang. It was Olivia, one of the few friends who had stuck by me through everything. And the second I heard her voice, I could tell something was off. She didn't even say hello, just jumped right in with, "Hey. So, have you seen what Travis is saying about you?" I hadn't. I hadn't looked at his social media, hadn't asked around. I was finally detached. But of course he couldn't leave it there. Of course he had to rewrite the ending like he was the wounded philosopher cast out from his temple. According to Olivia, he'd already spun an entire story for anyone who would listen. Told his friends I'd suddenly and coldly kicked him out after everything he'd done for the house. Said I owed him for his emotional investment. Claimed he had poured his soul into building the energy of the space, and that he'd been blindsided by my decision to exile him from the place he'd helped shape. That phrase, "morally built this space," was the one that got me. Like he was a silent architect of vibes. Like I hadn't been the one working double shifts to keep the lights on while he rearranged plants and watched crypto tutorials in his pajamas. He even told people that I'd been jealous of his growth, that I couldn't handle the fact that he was on a new path and needed to leave anything that didn't align with his inner evolution. Apparently, I was now the bitter, rigid ex who couldn't see past her own trauma to appreciate the man he was becoming. He conveniently left out the fact that he hadn't paid a single bill, that the house had never been his, that he'd invited another woman over while still unpacking the last of his nonsense dreams. None of that made it into his version. In his version, he was the misunderstood artist, the displaced healer, the spiritual nomad wronged by a woman who didn't believe in the vision. I didn't even get angry when Olivia told me all this. I just sat there, listening calm, because it made sense. Travis couldn't handle reality when it didn't serve his narrative. So of course he had to flip it. In his world, if he didn't win, then the system must be broken. If someone stopped enabling him, it had to be betrayal. Let him talk. Let him post. Let him gather sympathetic texts from people who'd never set foot in the house or paid a single cent toward anything inside it. The difference was, I didn't need to tell my version loudly. The silence of that house now said everything. I sat on the couch for about an hour after that phone call with Olivia, not angry, not surprised, just tired. I had spent 6 years keeping things together, making excuses, giving him chances, covering the gaps he never even tried to fill. And now that I had finally drawn a line and taken my space back, he was out there painting himself as the wounded visionary, the man who gave his soul to a home he never even paid to keep warm. I knew I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but I also knew how people talk, and I was done letting his voice be the loudest just because he didn't know when to stop lying. So I opened my laptop. No dramatic caption, no paragraph full of bitterness. Just facts. I took clear photos of the deed with my name on it. The utility bills going back over a year, every single one with my account number and payment receipts. I screenshotted the homeowner's insurance policy, the confirmation email from the locksmith, the online banking summaries showing rent never came from his account because he didn't have one. Then I added a spreadsheet I'd started compiling that morning. 6 years worth of shared expenses, itemized line by line. Groceries, internet, electric, repairs, even the toaster he threw away because it didn't spark joy. I attached it all in one long message, and I sent it to our mutual circle. Not everyone. Just the ones he'd clearly reached out to already. I kept it short. Just one line at the end. Here is the truth. Then decide for yourself who to believe. I turned off my phone after that, closed the laptop, poured a glass of water, and stood in my kitchen, alone, for the first time in years without tension crawling up my spine. I wasn't chasing sympathy. I wasn't starting a war. I was just done letting someone rewrite my story without ever having earned the pen. After I hit send on that group message, I shut everything down. My phone, my laptop, my need to explain myself. I knew what would happen next. The silence from some people, the quiet apologies from others, the awkward texts asking if I was okay, without actually saying they had believed him. I didn't need them to say it. I knew who had stayed quiet when it counted, and who had forwarded his story without asking a single question. In the message, I'd attached everything. Scanned copies of the deed, utility bills with my name on them, 6 years of receipts and bank statements, a spreadsheet detailing every major expense from the roof replacement to the groceries he never paid for. I even added photos of my office, before and after he called it his workspace. I wanted it all laid out. I wanted people to see the math. Not drama, not accusations, just numbers. And I ended it with one sentence. Here is the truth. Then decide for yourself who to believe. Later, I heard from Olivia that Travis wasn't taking it well. He was couch surfing. His business contacts weren't as generous as he thought, and even the friends who had defended him were starting to back away. He was sleeping in his car sometimes, bouncing between 2 or 3 places that hadn't yet told him no. Apparently, he said he needed to be away from negative energy while he figured out his next chapter. I didn't smile at that, not even a little. It was just sad, watching a man still too deep in his own delusion to see what he'd lost. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate him. I just wanted the truth to be louder than his version. That was all. And once I'd done that, I could finally let go. So that's it. That's the end.